For 45 years, Dean Calloway believed his father, a respected geologist, had simply vanished into the Utah canyons, a victim of the unforgiving wilderness. The official story was a tragic accident, a narrative Dean had reluctantly accepted. But when a university paleontology team unearths a dinosaur femur with a 1970s rock hammer impossibly embedded beside it, Dean recognizes the tool from old family photographs. The discovery ignites a hope he thought long dead. Sending him on a quest to prove his father's disappearance was no accident, but the result of a dark betrayal buried deep in the rock. What would you do if a clue to a loved one's disappearance surfaced after nearly half a century? It's a question most of us never have to face, but for one man, it became a shocking reality. Stick around to hear how a discovery that defied science unraveled a 45-year-old lie. Dean Calloway adjusted the stack of world history papers on his desk, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds of his classroom. The final bell had rung an hour ago, but he often stayed late, finding a quiet comfort in the ordered silence of the empty school. It was a predictable life, a stable one, and that's exactly how he designed it. At 52, he had a loving wife, a daughter in college, and a career that, while not thrilling, was meaningful. It was a world away from the one his father, Arthur Calloway, had inhabited, a world of rugged landscapes, academic rivalries, and the constant, dusty pursuit of things hidden in the earth. A framed photo sat on the corner of his desk, a black and white image of a smiling, sun-weathered man in his 30s, wearing denim overalls and a wide-brimmed hat. In a leather holster on his hip rested a rock hammer, its handle wrapped in a distinctive pattern of worn leather cord. Dean was only 7 when that man walked into the Utah Badlands for the last time in the summer of 1978 and never came back. The official search lasted weeks, then months, before finally being called off. The conclusion was simple and brutal. Arthur Calloway, a brilliant but notoriously daring geologist, had likely fallen into an uncharted ravine or been caught in a flash flood, his body lost forever to the elements. For decades, that was the story. A tragedy, a void, a cautionary tale that had steered Dean away from the wild places his father loved and toward the safety of books and classrooms. He was clearing his email inbox, deleting spam and flagging student inquiries, when a message with an unfamiliar subject line caught his eye. Regarding Arthur Calloway, University of Utah. He clicked it open. The email was from a Dr. Eris Thorne, head of the university's paleontology department. Dean had met him once, years ago, when settling his father's academic estate. Dr. Thorne's message was brief and professional. He explained that a recent landslide in the Morrison Formation had exposed a new fossil bed. During the excavation, his team had found something highly unusual. He wrote, "We are hesitant to make any claims until we can verify certain details. I have attached a photograph. I apologize if this brings up difficult memories, but we believe it may be relevant to your father's case." Dean's finger trembled slightly as he clicked the attachment. The image loaded, displaying a massive fossilized femur, the unmistakable bone of a large Jurassic dinosaur. But it was the object next to it that made the air leave Dean's lungs. There, fused into the same slab of rock, was a rusted rock hammer. The steel head was pitted with age, but the handle was unmistakable. It was wrapped in the same distinctive pattern of crisscrossing leather cord from the photo on his desk. It was his father's hammer. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding against his ribs. It was impossible. A tool from 1978 couldn't be fossilized in rock that was 150 million years old. Yet there it was, the story of a simple accident, the narrative that had defined his life and his loss suddenly felt thin and fragile, like a lie that had finally started to crack. For the first time in 45 years, Dean felt a flicker of something other than grief. It was a burning, urgent need to know the truth. He closed his laptop, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the silent school, his mind already thousands of miles away in the canyons of Utah. 2 days later, Dean was standing in a climate-controlled laboratory at the University of Utah, the scent of dust and preservation chemicals hanging in the air. In front of him, resting on a steel table under bright lights, was the object from the photograph. It was larger in person, the dinosaur bone a deep, earthy brown, the hammer a ghostly rusted relic from another time. both locked together in a single slab of mudstone. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and observant eyes, stood beside him. The landslide uncovered the entire section, Eris explained, gesturing to the artifact. We were ecstatic about the femur. It's a nearly complete Allosaurus. But the hammer, well, it's a paleontological impossibility. We've never seen anything like it. Dean leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the tool. He didn't need to touch it. He knew. It's his, he said, his voice quiet. The leather wrapping, he did it himself. He said it gave him a better grip. Eris nodded slowly. That's what we suspected. Your father's disappearance was national news in geological circles. His name is still legendary. Dean ran a hand through his hair. What does it mean? How can this happen? Eris crossed his arms, his expression a mixture of scientific curiosity and caution. Logically, it can't. Fossilization of this kind takes millions of years. A modern steel tool can't be embedded in Jurassic rock. The leading theories are that it's either an elaborate, incredibly skilled hoax or some unknown geological phenomenon we don't understand. A hoax. The word hung in the air. Who would create such a thing, and why? Where exactly did you find this? Dean asked. Eris pulled up a topographical map on a nearby monitor, zooming in on a remote, rugged area of canyons and mesas. Right here. About 5 miles from where your father's truck was found abandoned back in '78. It was too close to be a coincidence. Dean felt a new resolve hardening within him. There was one other person with him on that expedition, Dean said, turning from the map. His research partner, Sterling Croft. Eris's eyebrows raised in recognition. Of course, Professor Croft, one of the giants in the field. His name is on half the textbooks my students use. Dean nodded. He lives in Park City. I think I need to pay him a visit. The drive to Park City was a blur of snow-dusted mountains and upscale resorts. Sterling Croft's home was a sprawling, modern structure of glass and cedar, perched on a mountainside with a panoramic view of the valley. When the door opened, Sterling himself stood there, looking every bit the celebrated academic. He was in his late 70s now, with a full head of white hair and a charismatic smile, but his eyes were as sharp as Dean remembered from his childhood. Dean! My goodness, it's been ages, Sterling said, his voice warm and inviting as he ushered Dean inside. What brings you all the way out here? They sat in a vast living room with a stone fireplace, the walls adorned with awards and photos of Sterling alongside famous scientists and politicians. Dean got straight to the point, explaining the university's discovery and pulling out his phone to show Sterling the picture of the impossible fossil. Sterling studied the image, a thoughtful frown on his face. Then he let out a soft chuckle. Well, I'll be, he said, handing the phone back. That is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Arthur always did have a knack for finding the oddest things. It's his hammer, Sterling, Dean said, watching the older man's reaction closely. They found it near where he disappeared. Sterling's smile faded, replaced by a look of solemn sympathy. Dean, your father was my best friend, but he was a risk-taker. He loved to push boundaries, go where no one else would. I have no doubt he was exploring some dangerous cliff face, dropped his hammer, and it somehow got wedged in a fissure with that bone. It's a 1 in a billion coincidence, a geological freak of nature. The explanation was smooth, plausible, and it made Dean's skin crawl. It was too easy, too neat. The university thinks it might be a hoax, Dean pressed. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. Academics. They have to consider every possibility. But who would go to the trouble, and for what? No, it's a tragic, bizarre coincidence. A final, strange puzzle left behind by a man who loved them. He stood up, placing a comforting hand on Dean's shoulder. It must be hard seeing this after all these years. But sometimes a strange rock is just a strange rock. Don't go chasing ghosts, son. Let your father rest. Driving back to his hotel in Salt Lake City, Dean couldn't shake the feeling that Sterling was lying. His dismissal was too quick, his explanation too polished. That night he called Dr. Thorne, recounting the conversation. He called it a geological freak of nature, Dean said, and told me not to chase ghosts. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dean, Eris said, his voice now holding a new edge, I didn't want to say anything until our lab confirmed it, but I got the preliminary spectrometry results back an hour ago. And? Dean asked, sitting up straighter. The matrix, the rock that's holding the bone and the hammer together, it's not Morrison mudstone. It's got polymers and trace elements that don't belong. It's not a natural concretion. Dean felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying? I'm saying Sterling was wrong, Eris replied. It's not a geological freak. It's man-made. Someone fabricated that entire artifact. The revelation struck Dean like a physical blow. A hoax, but not a prank. This was something darker. This was a cover-up. Why would someone fake such a thing? The only reason was to create a lie, to hide something. He hung up the phone and turned to his laptop, his purpose now crystal clear. He began to dig, not into the earth, but into the past. He searched university archives, digital libraries, and financial records, focusing on the years 1978 and 1979. And there, he found it. In the spring of 1979, less than a year after his father vanished, Sterling Croft published a groundbreaking paper on a unique, perfectly preserved Allosaurus skeleton discovered in Utah. The discovery, which he claimed to have made alone, was hailed as one of the most significant finds of the decade. It launched Sterling's career into the stratosphere, earning him grants, tenure, and the fame he still enjoyed. Dean stared at the publication date, his blood running cold. His father hadn't just been a partner on that expedition. He had been the competition. Dean knew he needed more than a suspicion. He needed proof. He called his mother, who now lived a quiet life in Florida. He asked her if she still had any of his father's old letters, anything from that final expedition. A day later, a scanned email attachment arrived. It was a letter dated just 3 days before Arthur Calloway was officially declared missing. His father's familiar slanted handwriting filled the page. He wrote about the magnificent fossil they had found, his excitement palpable. But the tone shifted in the final paragraph. Sterling is acting strange, Arthur wrote. He wants all the glory for this. He keeps talking about how this find will make a man's career. I'm afraid of what he's capable of. I'm going back to the site alone tomorrow to secure our claim. I've hidden a copy of my field notes near the overhang at Grid 7B on the survey map, just in case. Grid 7B. It was the final clue. Dean immediately called Dr. Thorne, who managed to pull the original 1978 survey maps from the university archives. Within an hour, they had located the precise spot, a remote rock overhang in a treacherous part of the Badlands, not far from where the fake fossil had been uncovered. Armed with the coordinates, a rented four-wheel drive, and a determination that bordered on obsession, Dean drove out into the wilderness that had claimed his father. The hike was grueling, the landscape a maze of sun-baked rock and steep-walled canyons. After hours of navigating by GPS and the old paper map, he found it, a distinctive rock overhang, just as his father had described. He searched the base of the cliff, his fingers probing every crack and crevice. Finally, behind a loose rock, his hand closed around a metal box, rusted but intact. With his heart pounding, he pried it open. Inside, preserved in a waterproof bag, was a leather-bound notebook. It was his father's field journal, filled with detailed notes, sketches, and survey data. It was undeniable proof that he was the primary discoverer of the Allosaurus. As Dean stood up, clutching the journal, the sound of boots crunching on gravel made him spin around. Sterling Croft stood on the trail not 20 feet away, his face grim, his charismatic smile gone. I had a feeling you might end up here, Sterling said, his voice cold. A friend at the university told me you were looking at the old survey maps. You should have left it alone, Dean. Dean held up the journal. It's over, Sterling. It's all in here. He was going to expose you. Sterling took a step closer, his eyes fixed on the notebook. He was going to ruin me. That discovery was my ticket. and he wanted to share the credit. Share it. After all my years of work. The confession poured out of him, a torrent of resentment held back for 45 years. He described the argument at the dig site, the anger, the shove. It was an accident, Sterling hissed. He fell, he hit his head, he was dead. I panicked. He explained how he buried Arthur's body in a deep fissure, then spent the next 2 days meticulously crafting the artifact. He used his knowledge of geology and a powerful industrial epoxy to fuse the hammer to the real dinosaur bone, encasing it in a man-made rock. It was a masterpiece, Sterling said, a flicker of pride in his eyes. A perfect impossibility, the perfect way to hide the murder weapon in plain sight. Who would ever look for a killer's tool in a 150-million-year-old fossil? But before Dean could react, Sterling lunged, not at him, but at the journal. They struggled, the precious book caught between them. Dean was younger and stronger, and he shoved Sterling back. The old man stumbled, his feet slipping on the loose scree at the edge of the trail. For a terrible moment, he teetered on the brink, his arms windmilling in the air. Then, with a cry of shock, he was gone, disappearing over the edge into the canyon below. Stunned, Dean crept to the edge and looked down. Sterling lay motionless on the rocks far below. Shaking, Dean pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, but he found one bar. He dialed 911. The authorities found Sterling Croft's body, and with the journal as evidence and a confession recorded on Dean's 911 call, the truth was finally official. Following the directions Sterling had inadvertently revealed, they located the fissure where he had hidden Arthur Calloway's body 45 years earlier. Dean was finally able to bring his father home. They held a memorial service, not for a man lost to the wilderness, but for a brilliant scientist who was a victim of ambition and betrayal. The University of Utah officially renamed the Allosaurus discovery the Calloway fossil, ensuring Arthur's legacy was finally restored. Months later, Dean stood in his classroom once more, the quiet of the afternoon settling around him. The old photo was still on his desk, but now, next to it, sat a small, weathered rock, a piece from the canyon where his father had spent his final moments. The grief was still there, a dull ache that would never fully disappear, but it was no longer tangled with the confusion and uncertainty of the unknown. The ghost had been laid to rest. Dean had chased it down, and in finding the truth about his father's death, he had finally found a way to live with his own life. Do you believe a crime committed that long ago deserves the same punishment as one committed today? Or does the passage of time change the nature of justice? If this story made you think, consider sharing it with someone who appreciates a good mystery. Every share helps stories like this find a new audience. Thank you for listening.